All right, everybody. I wanted to welcome everybody here to our webinar tonight, titled Putting Together a Great Medical School Application and Personal Statement. I'm Sahil Mehta. I'm the founder of MedSchoolCoach and one of the advisors here. And we're really excited to host you tonight and take you guys through putting together a great application and personal statement. It should be a really informative talk, and you should be able to really get a lot out of this. Now, a couple of things I just want to draw your attention to. The first is the chat function. We would love to hear your feedback. We'd love to hear your questions. So feel free to drop questions throughout the webinar here so that we can try to answer them at the end. At the end of this, we're going to have a roundtable discussion and be able to go over a lot of the questions that you may have. So I'm really looking forward to being able to answer some of those questions along with some of the other advisors. The other thing that we have for you is a handout. So if you're able to check out the handout page, you're going to see a couple of personal statement tips on there. But without further ado, kind of let's get started here about putting together a great application and personal statement for med school. So just to introduce some of your hosts, I myself am here as founder of MedSchoolCoach. I'm an interventional radiologist, and I've helped a few thousand people through the med school application at this point. We're also joined by Dr. Whipsit, Dr. Eilers, and Dr. Katzen, all of whom have extensive admissions committee experience and will be with us for the roundtable discussion. So it's going to be a lot of fun to hear their take and their thoughts on some of the nuances of the application and what an admissions committee really looks for. And then we also have Dr. Marinelli with us. Dr. Marinelli is our lead advisor. She has an incredible expertise in medical school admissions. She was a former admissions committee member at UC Irvine, and she's going to be leading you through much of the presentation. And then I'm going to jump back on towards the end here and be able to lead that roundtable discussion. So again, feel free to use that chat button down at the bottom right of your screen so that we can answer questions as we go, or more likely at the end during the roundtable discussion. So I'm going to hand it off right now to Dr. Marinelli, who should be on the line here. Renee, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Great. I think we can. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the keyboard and mouse here,
Okay,
and Dr. Marinelli is going to take it away.
perfect. So let's make sure this is working here. Okay, I think so. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. So we're going to cover several aspects of the medical school application for this upcoming cycle and any cycle. So this is really important for the people that will be applying in this coming June. It's definitely very important to start getting ready and make sure that you set out a timeline for yourself. And then we'll also go through a lot of the common mistakes, how to enter coursework, your activities, talk a little bit about letters of recommendation and personal statement. And then also, as Dr. Mehta mentioned, we'll go through the advisor question and answer. Okay, I think you still have the controls, Dr. Mehta, but okay. So we got a poll question here to start off with. So have you started working on your medical school application? And this will definitely be maybe a little bit more applicable to the people that are planning to apply this summer, but definitely if you're thinking about it in the next year or two, please answer the poll as well, and so we can get to know where you stand in this process. All right. So a lot of people have started. That's great. Good job. Way to be prepared. So a few of you have started applying or planning on applying this year and have not gotten started. So we'll definitely talk about the timeline and hopefully encourage you to get started pretty soon here. We can go to the next slide. Are we having any technical difficulties here?
Dr. Marilyn, you're able to see the next slide? I just advanced the slide here.
Hmm. You know what? I'm not for some reason. It's still stuck on the poll for me, but you know what? I have the slideshow up on my computer so I can go through the next slide myself. Sorry about that. So here's the timeline. So every year there's a little bit of variations on these dates. These are the years that, these are the timeline and the dates for this year specifically. As most of you probably know, for the students who submit their application earlier, they usually have greater success. And this is because most schools use rolling admissions, which means that it's kind of a first come, first serve application process. So people that submit their application first will primarily be reviewed by the medical school admissions committee first and be offered secondary applications and interviews first. So as you can see, AMCAS is one of the primary application servers that we talk about. It opens May 2nd, and it's open for submission in June. It takes a few weeks for it to be processed. So what that means is even if you submit it on the first day that it opens for submission, June 1st, it will take about 2 to 6 weeks for it to be processed by AMCAS, and we'll talk a little bit about that more. So schools don't really start receiving your application until about the end of June. For AAO COMAS, which is the osteopathic application, and TDM SAS, which is the Texas application, you can complete those and submit them both in May. However, those ones the schools do not start receiving them until the middle of June as well. I think we're having a little bit of technical difficulties with others seeing the screen. Can we maybe try to advance the poll, Dr. Mehta?
Yes, give me a second here. Sorry, guys. Sorry, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Hopefully,
Okay, now I
now.
can see it.
All right, perfect. Sorry about that, guys. I think I just pressed one wrong button. So go ahead. I think everybody can now see the screen. Thank you, everybody, for letting us know that you couldn't see the slides. Hopefully, you can see them now. If you just shoot us a message letting us know, you should be seeing the slides now.
So next we'll talk about some common mistakes that we see in the application. And lots of this is punctuation or just formatting errors. So even though, as you see on this screen, this person didn't capitalize Miami, it seems like a very mild and minor mistake made on their application, but this can actually be grounds for your application to not be under further consideration. And even though that sounds really, really harsh, that is just because medical schools receive thousands and thousands of applications, and a lot of people are super competitive. So they kind of take this as a sign of maybe that student wasn't thorough enough or complete enough. And so instead of putting you in the pile for further consideration, they can actually just disregard your application at this step. So this is just such a minor, common mistake, but definitely have somebody look over your application, look it over again and again and again until you know that punctuation, spelling, grammar, syntax, all of that is correct and in order. Another large part of the application is putting your coursework into the AMCAS application. So this is a very tedious process. You have to have transcripts sent to AMCAS from any school that you've attended, and you have to enter those courses from all of those schools. It's very important to try to enter the coursework as correctly as possible, because if you do incorrectly enter the coursework, then this can delay in the application processing. So as I mentioned before, when AMCAS is verifying your application, this is one thing that takes a while, is that they're actually verifying your courses you entered against the courses that are on your transcript that you submitted from the school. So if there's any discrepancies between what you've entered and then what is actually on your transcripts, this can really, really delay your application. So it's important to take this part seriously and slowly enter these. Another helpful tip for entering courses is and we can advance to the next slide, is trying to maximize your BCPM GPA, which is the courses that are generally regarded as biology, chemistry, physics, or math. So you really want to make this GPA as high as possible. And one way to do that is if you have a course that maybe is not under these specific titles, biology, chemistry, physics, or math, but you received a good grade in it. So let's say psychology. Let's say you got an A in psychology, but the psychology course was a very heavy biology-based course. You could designate that as a BCPM course, and that will help boost up that GPA. And however, on the flip side, if you did poorly in that heavy biology psychology course, you can designate that as all other, so it won't bring down your BCPM GPA as much. I hope that makes sense. Regardless, each GPA is definitely important. Schools are going to look at your biology with a lot of weight because this is kind of a little bit more telling of the courses that you'll be taking in medical school, but certainly they want to see how well you've done throughout your undergraduate education and also just in total, all of these together, how well you've done. Next part of the application, without talking about demographics and biographical information, is the activities and experiences. So this is another very big part of your application. You're allowed 15 experiences for AMCAS, and 3 of those are allowed to be the most meaningful experiences, which is a chance for you to talk about why this experience was so important and to further expand on it. You can see on the left-hand side that this is the information that AMCAS asks you to enter. Some of it is actually required, and some of it you just need to, it is nice to have if you don't have all information. For example, the contacts, phone, email address, they're not required. You have to put one, but try to enter as much information as possible. Some of this is difficult to obtain, especially if it was an older activity, but try to enter it get as much information as possible. It's very, very rare that anybody ever gets contacted about these activities, but it's important to have as much information as you can. Make sure that you approximate the hours, the total hours. You don't have to be spot on, but definitely be honest when you are approximating the hours. For the experience description, we usually recommend that people write these out in paragraph form. It flows a little bit better. It's easier to read than somebody that does bullet points. However, you can do bullet points, but usually, especially for the most meaningful experience, it's going to be more easy to read and a better flow if it is in a paragraph form. But either way, if you choose to do bullet points or paragraph, just stick with that same format for all of your activities. And it's really important to make sure that your activities really highlights your characteristics and your qualities. You don't want to just list exactly what you did, but you want to emphasize what you learned and what you gained from those activities. And one final note is a lot of people will ask us, do we have to fill up all 15 activities? And the answer is no. You don't need to stretch and put an activity that you did for 2 hours, or something you only did one time if it was non-significant, just to fill up the activity boxes. If you only have 10 activities but they were very significant, then that's totally fine. If you have 15 activities, that's fine as well, but make sure that they're quality activities rather than just trying to complete all of the allotted spaces. When you get into the activity screen, and this is a close-up, you're able to classify the activity into the what type of activity it was, sorry. So try to group common activities together. For example, if you have several hobbies, you don't need to list each hobby as an individual activity unless maybe it's very, very significant. For example, you don't need to list running, skiing, traveling, playing piano as all different hobbies. You can just make one activity hobbies and discuss all of those. Um, and also, it's very important to pick the experience type that accurately describes what your experience was. However, it is also important to be well-rounded. So maybe if you have, a community service experience, that could be also considered medical, but then had something that was um, an art. I'm trying to make this up as I go along. I'm sorry. A teaching tutoring assistant that maybe was you taught a a diabetic class to the community, but you're really lacking your teaching experiences. Perhaps you could classify that into the teaching experience rather than a medical clinical experience if you feel that you have sufficient medical and clinical experiences. Hopefully that is pretty clear. Another poll question here. So is there one activity you feel that you're most lacking on your application? And out of these options, definitely all of these are very important, and all of these carry a lot of weight by the admissions committee. So got a lot of clinical work and research experience. And that's what I will say is I most commonly hear from applicants to medical school. And those are kind of the hardest experiences to get your hands on, is clinical work where you're directly working with patients, and research experience. But both are very important parts of the application, and definitely areas that admissions committees want to see that you have experience in. This is a sample activities section. I obviously won't go through and read it all, but this is what it looks like when you finally have your AMCAS completed. It will give all of that demographical information at the top, your experience description, and then if it's the most meaningful experience, that will go right below the experience description. An important note here is the most meaningful experience remarks really shouldn't be a repeat of the description. You should use this as an expansion of the description to maybe go into more depth or different aspects of the experience that you didn't have enough characters to describe it in that first experience description. So let's transition to letters of recommendation. So a quick question here. What is your biggest fear about letters of recommendation? All right, good. I'm glad that people don't think their professors hate them. I've never talked to my science professors. That looks pretty common, and I don't know how to ask for one, so we'll definitely talk about that. And my professor may write something negative. That is always something a little worrisome as well. So let's talk a little bit about letters of recommendation. So each school will have their own letter of recommendation requirement. However, if you get the following letters of recommendation, you will generally meet most of the school's requirements. So try to get 2 from science professors, 1 from a non-science professor, and 1 to 2 from other people that you've worked with. Definitely try to get a physician if possible, especially if you're applying to osteopathic schools. Most osteopathic schools require a letter of recommendation from a physician, so it's very important to get that letter. Also, a huge reminder here is request these letters early. If you haven't done so already and you're applying this year, then you should do it tomorrow. Professors get backlogged with letters of recommendation. This can delay your application. Same thing goes if you have a committee at your school that you'll be using. Talk to the committee early to see what requirements they have, when they need to set up an interview with you in order to get that letter completed long before the application is due. We're going to transition to the personal statement. So how important do you think the personal statement is to admissions committee? So very important. Wow, okay, 89% say very important. It can make or break your application. So I would have to say I definitely agree with that. It can really make or break your application. It is um, there's my slide, very important part of your application. This is really your chance to demonstrate who you are, tell your story, list out your, well, not list, but demonstrate your personal characteristics and qualities while telling the admissions committee why you want to become a doctor and illustrating to them why you're going to become a good doctor. It is a very difficult statement to write, but you're exactly right for the most part of the polling responses is a good personal statement can, or a great personal statement can really help advance your application. An average personal statement probably won't do much to harm you. However, it won't do much to help you. And a bad personal statement can really do a lot to harm you and likely stop the advancement of your application. Um, Again, with similar to the AMCAS activities, really emphasize quality over quantity here. So you're allotted 5,300 characters in AMCAS, which is a little bit more than a page in a Word document. We really recommend keeping your personal statement to about a page. Definitely try to, if you can say the same thing in less words, then do it that way. Admissions committee members read hundreds, thousands of personal statements, so keep it interesting, keep it to the point so that they don't have to just read a bunch of information that is redundant or doesn't really add anything to your overall essay. And again here, edit, and then edit it again. Have somebody look this over, have somebody look it over again, look it over until you just can't even read those words anymore because it's so important to make sure that there are no mistakes in this document. And then again, start writing your personal statement early. A couple tips about writing your personal statement and trying to make it as interesting as possible. So you'll see on the right, an interesting introduction is very, very important. So try to be creative there. Try not to be completely generic and talk about, I've always wanted to be a doctor since I was 2 as your introduction. Try to make it something that is going to stand out and make the admissions committee member want to continue reading the personal statement. A couple things on the left, try to avoid some specifics. Definitely don't mention your MCAT score, your GPA. Again, no typos, no spelling mistakes. Definitely do not make up any stories or fabricate any information. Be honest. Some relative no-nos that you want to try to avoid as much as possible are listing things, mentioning awards, and then try to avoid these more generic reasons about going into medicine. Like I said, about how you wanted to be a doctor since you're in preschool, or talking about your second cousin who suffered a broken toe and that experience pushed you into becoming a physician. Some people will have legitimate kind of epiphany situations that really changed them and made them want to be a physician. But a lot of admissions committees will consider these very generic. So make sure you have somebody read through this to help decide if this sounds legitimate or if it just sounds like one of those generic, I've always wanted to be a doctor kind of stories. These are a couple personal statement introduction examples. Um, Obviously, again, I won't read all of these, but I really like these personal statement examples because they start off and most of them will illustrate a picture for the reader. They are interesting. You want to continue reading them and see where are they going with this? What is it that they're trying to tell me? At the end of the one on the left in the middle, you can see that this one kind of ends and sets the stage or the theme for the rest of the personal statement. So you can kind of see where the essay will be going. And again, you want to keep reading, and this is what you need to do, is make it unique, interesting, so that that reader really wants to keep going instead of just putting it aside in a pile where they just have maybe skimmed your personal statement. Another poll, do you feel comfortable putting your experiences into a great personal statement? So yes, I'm basically Shakespeare, or no, my writing could use work. All right, yeah. I think most pre-medical students feel that way. I definitely felt that way when I wrote my personal statement. I felt that way when I had to write my personal statement for residency as well. So that's why it's awesome to ask for help and to ask other people and to really have somebody else look at your experiences and yourself from an objective standpoint and try to have them classify what they think is going to set you apart and what makes you unique. And I can tell you from my experience working with so many different applicants that that is one thing that med school coach advisors do that is just so helpful, is that we can look at all of your experiences and look at who you are as a person and focus the the content of your essay, find unique experiences to make that interesting introduction and really help you develop the content of your personal statement. But here, these are awesome tips as well that you can use to help develop this personal statement. Your friends, your college pre-health advisor, us, the advisors at Med School Coach, and then, we will also give you our free personal statement guide if you like us on Facebook, and you'll get a link to get that guide in a couple of days. So finally, just a few last minute tips. Again, start early for those of you who have already started on your application. That's great. A lot of people will wait until the last minute to write their experiences or their personal statement and then end up turning their application in later. And this is just going to hurt your chances for admission. If you're applying to osteopathic and allopathic schools, you can usually write your allopathic essay first and then just modify it a little bit to be specific for osteopathic schools, maybe adding in a little bit of specifics for osteopathy and your interest there, and then the character count is a little bit different. A final note, if you copy and paste into AMCAS or AO just be very careful of formatting issues. Some things can get messed up, and that just leads to the next bullet point here is proofread, proofread, and then proofread some more. And make sure you're asking for help from those around you and from third-party sources.
All right. So thanks, Dr. Marinelli, for leading us through some of those points. And the idea there was to give you guys a broad overview of some of the specifics of the application and what goes into it, and a few key tips to hopefully get you to put together that great application. Now, I think a lot of you said you were applying this year, and a lot of you said you had already kind of started on the application, which is great. As Dr. Marinelli mentioned, the application opens up in a couple of weeks here for both MD, DO, as well as Texas schools. The submission dates vary for each of those three different application systems, but they're all coming up in May or early June. So really great to get your application together now. What we're hoping to do in the remainder of our time here is actually pick the brains of our advisors who we have here. And so what I'd really encourage you guys to do is ask any questions you have within the chat function, and we will be able to hopefully answer a lot of them as we go along. So to get us kicked off, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass the mic around to a couple of our advisors and ask them a few questions that I think everybody kind of wants an answer to, and hopefully this gets your juices stirring for all our attendees, and you guys can kind of think about the questions you want to ask. So I'm going to start with Dr. Eilers and just give him a question here. So Stephen, what do you think is the biggest mistake you see applicants make in their personal statement in your experience at admissions committees and in your experience sort of working with students at MedSchoolCoach?
Sure. So thank you, Sahil and Renee, for having me. My name is Steve Eilers. I'm, as mentioned, worked with University of Chicago while a medical student there with the admissions committee. And I read a lot of personal statements before I'd interview candidates, and I think it's one area that if it's really an interesting part, it really stands out, and completely agree about that opening paragraph. You want to hook the reader in. I've read some that just sound so boring, it's almost work to get through it. And I think the biggest mistake that I see from this is ultimately people don't always answer why they themselves, why Steve Eilers, why Sahil Mehta wants to go and become a physician. And I think that your story is really important. That I've read some information about TED Talks that the best ones usually tell stories in them. And you want to tell your story here. And even more importantly, as a literary device, you want to show. You don't always want to tell. So if you can be creative, if you can give good descriptions, that instead of saying that I walked down the road, you might talk about how you saw the leaves changing and you were experiencing. It's a little bit more of a literature style of writing, especially for that first paragraph to hook the reader in. I think grammatical errors I notice very often. My mom reread all of my essays before applying to medical school, and there were grammatical errors I never saw, run-on sentences, and these can be very glaring if you don't have words that begin or start a sentence that aren't capitalized. Things that just show a lack of effort and thought can be a great way for someone to say, we can interview someone else. And so I think being very careful about the grammatical errors is really important. And I think just making sure it's really authentic about yourself. Take time to be able to talk about the experiences that you've had, highlight them, and be able to wrap that together. I think that a lot of people want to help as physicians, and at the end you should talk about why you need to become a physician and that you cannot go any other career route to satisfy that. What is it about medicine that you will ultimately find satisfying, that you need to become a physician, and that ultimately that's the only route that you can go? I think that's important to discuss because someone may ask you, if you couldn't go into medicine, what would you do? And you should make it clear that your experiences show that you ultimately want to become a great physician.
Thanks, Steve. So let me actually turn the table over to Dr. Katzen, who's one of our most experienced advisors, has a great sort of wealth of experience helping our students through and being on admissions committee. So Dr. Katzen, can I ask you, how do you suggest applicants start preparing the activities and experiences section of their application when they're ready to get going?
Thank you all for having me tonight as well. What I usually recommend is that that the applicants who I talk to and have advised literally just take a sheet of paper and begin to think about and write down line items of what they have done, whether it's sports activity, music, their research, or whatever. And then, depending on how many they have written down, begin to think about them a little bit. Are they all appropriate? Are some more important to them than others? Not necessarily all showing just medical or paramedical work, but maybe showing, and when I advising an applicant of which to use, I try to think about with them which of those activities might show that they've had leadership activities, or that they've done something for the community or volunteering, and then we can begin to work on, from that list, which ultimately will be the most meaningful that are worth expanding. And as Dr. Marinelli said, you want to sell yourself and make sure that the personal statement accentuates you as much as you can. But the activity section is one of the other significant sections of the application where you can really put forth what it is you have to offer, what things you have done that have made you different. And this is where, I think with the proper guidance, either by groups such as ours or your pre-med advisors, if you carefully choose the activities to write, and most importantly in my mind, choose the 3 that are going to be most meaningful, you're really showing the admissions committee more about who you are, not just what your grades are. And that's the way that I usually start, is just by simply asking people to write a list of what they think are appropriate activities, and they usually will come up with a pretty good list, and frequently we'll work through that list. And sometimes they don't realize, the more you talk to somebody, that they've had hobbies or sports activities that they think aren't significant. But sometimes I think it's important to show sort of other sides of an applicant, other than just they can get good grades and get good test grades. So that's how I usually recommend and advise applicants.
Great, thanks so much, Dr. Catton. I think Dr. Lipset is actually was unable to join us, so let's skip over his question because I know there's a lot of great questions out there. But one more question for Dr. Marinelli, and I think this is a very relevant question because a lot of students who seem to struggle with this. So, Renee, how should an applicant ask for a letter of recommendation from his or her professors?
Yeah, this is a great question. And so what I usually do is have the applicants think of a course where science or non-science, because we talked about they need letters from both, a course where they did well in and that they feel that they had a good relationship with that professor. So perhaps they visited the professor's office hours, maybe they talked to the professor after class, maybe they stuck out in the professor's mind, maybe they were one of the highest test scorers, or they stayed after lab very often in order to really master a subject. So try to think of the professors that you think you potentially made an impact on them. And then just go and approach them. Go to their office hours. Tell them exactly what you're doing. I'm applying to medical school this year. I really enjoyed your course, and was wondering if you would be able to write me a letter of recommendation. Then I always tell applicants to really gauge that professor's response. If the professor says, oh, you were an excellent student, I'd be so happy to write you a letter of recommendation, absolutely, they would probably be a great letter of recommendation writer. However, if the professor's response is something to the extent of, well, you got a B, I didn't see you much in my office hours, I guess I could write you a letter, they may not be the most favorable letter writer. And so in that case, if they give you that sort of response, then you should probably go seek somebody else out. And that's totally okay. Some professors are going to know you better than others, and that's totally fine if you need to go and talk to somebody else. That's why I think it's so important to approach them in person as well, and not just over the phone or over email. Definitely try to approach them as much as possible in person during their office hours. And again, can't stress it enough, ask for them early. If you haven't asked for them already, go do it this week.
Great. So great news, everybody. Dr. Lipset is actually here, so I'm going to actually go back one. And Dr. Lipset, I'm going to open up the forum to you. What do you think makes a great personal statement? Oh, Dr. Lipset, I think we're having a little trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I'm glad I'm coming through. Renee, Sahil, thanks for the opportunity to contribute. Steve and Harvey, that's great stuff for our audience. Yeah, so just some comments about the personal statement. I don't think there's anything that intimidates the applicant more than the personal statement, usually, filling them with apprehension and anxiety. But that really shouldn't be the case because, I really think it's a great opportunity for the applicant to tell their story. You tell the reader who you are, but before discussing content, just want to talk about a few basics that I think will be helpful. First of all, I like the personal statement to have some structure, usually 3 parts. An introduction that engages the reader and introduces a theme, followed by the body or substance of the personal statement, and then a nice conclusion to wrap it all up. Now, one of the most important points, I think, and this has been discussed already, but let me emphasize it. You really need to write well because many file reviewers will assume that you can't write properly until proven otherwise. And I think they base that, to tell you the truth, on either past experience or some older reviewers actually have a bit of a bias. They believe that writing is a lost art. Well, prove that their preconception is a misconception. Prove them to be wrong. The way to do that is to use clear, direct language without a lot of extraneous words or cliches. No empty platitudes. Use proper grammar. I know Steve addressed that already. Errors either mean you can't write well, or worse, you're careless and not paying attention. The reviewer will not assume it's just a typographical error. Use college-level vocabulary. Avoid repetition of words or phrases. Use a thesaurus for appropriate synonyms. Keep it fresh. Certainly don't ramble and stay on point. Another thing that I try to stress, it's almost counterintuitive, but you want to keep it simple. Read your work aloud. If it sounds strange or bizarre, it probably is. Make use of paragraphs to separate ideas or experiences, but be sure to transition smoothly. Avoid the overuse of punctuation, such as a lot of quote marks for emphasis or semicolons as a substitute for proper sentence structure. Now, in terms of the content of the personal statement, I'll just spend 2 or 3 minutes. You know, as already stated, the introduction should contain a hook that captures the attention of the reader. It's the beginning of a short story about you. Now, the task of a file reviewer is mind-numbing, and I know this from personal experience, so don't let the reviewer doze off. Encourage the reader to move on to the body of the personal statement. Entice them with maybe a vignette or a mildly provocative statement that sets the tone. And I think Renee showed some good examples of that. Now, in the body, or the meat of the statement, I usually recommend that the applicant make a brief outline to organize the content. They can choose a theme, but stay focused. For example, you can talk about motivation and inspiration. How did you develop an interest in medicine? But you have to be specific. Underscore it with meaningful experiences, perhaps role models. Share your experiences with the reader. Medical or non-medical experiences are fine, but clearly explain how each experience affected or changed you. You know, you can discuss your personal strengths and skill sets and be candid, but don't self-destruct. Keep it positive. You can talk about your plans for the future, your goals. Use your experiences and strengths to make a convincing case that you should be given the opportunity or the privilege of becoming a physician. You know, it's not simply what you have accomplished. I mean, there's an AMCAS category or section in the primary to simply list what you've done. And I know, you know, Harvey Katzen, he nicely explained that. But now is the time to give a takeaway message. For example, let's say you have high academic achievement and accomplishment. The message is, I can handle this work. I'm not going to flunk out. If there's an experience that shows teamwork and collaboration, the message is, people like working with me. Now, physicians and researchers rarely work in a vacuum, so that's a marvelous trait to be able to demonstrate in a personal statement. If, let's say, you've had employment, the message is, I've got a work ethic. I also have good time management skills. I can handle a vigorous schedule. If you have volunteer activities, the message is, I'm altruistic, I really do care, and I know how to listen to people. Finally, shadowing experience. What's the benefit of real world experience in your personal statement? Well, you're sending a message, I know what I'm getting myself into. I'm not going to have an existential crisis or meltdown in my second or third year. And you realize that being a physician is not necessarily what you see on TV or in the movies. It may not be so glamorous, but despite all of that, you're still in. You know what you're getting yourself into, but you still want in. Finally, sometimes a little bit of biographical background, a little bit of autobiographical material is a good idea. You can talk a little bit about parents, siblings, heritage, family, if it adds texture to the personal statement. Finally, the conclusion should be concise with the key message. Summarize and tie it all together on a positive note. It's showtime. It's the time to sell yourself. Now, you could end with the personal attributes that make you especially well suited for a career in medicine. Now, the attributes should be supported by the body of the statement. At the conclusion, at the end, when the reader puts it down, they should be satisfied that they almost know you, are intrigued, and they'd love to meet you and interview you. I mean, that's our goal, that's our target. So just remember that developing the personal statement, it's a process. It often requires brainstorming and, as Renee indicated, multiple revisions. But it's time well spent. So it behooves the applicant to work hard and try as best as they can to enjoy the opportunity.
All right,
Thanks.
Dr. Lipset, thank you so much for going through that with us. I hope you guys all got that, and don't worry if you didn't get all of it. This is all being recorded, and so you're going to be able to watch it again, because I know that was some amazing advice that Dr. Lipset just gave you, and I know that many of you might want to hear that again. So, now let's actually go on to what I think is going to be the most fun part here, which is to get to some of your questions. So keep your questions coming, and what I'm going to do is kind of just go through some of these questions and shoot at our advisors and just ask them what they think and allow them to give you some of their answers. So I'm going to start with a question from Asher out there, and maybe I'll throw this to you, Dr. Eilers. There's a question from him that basically says, can the personal statement mention more detail about an activity that was also mentioned as one of the most significant activities? What do you think about that?
So I think that's a great question to discuss. The meaningful experiences section is designed to discuss why that experience really shaped you or how it had a profound effect on you. I think that the personal statement should be an area that really allows you to highlight things that aren't on your application elsewhere. If it was something that was so significant, that it was such an epiphany, that you really need to talk about in your personal statement because why you want to become a physician wouldn't make sense without that piece of information, then definitely put it in. But I would limit how much you talk about it. I wouldn't repeat information that you already have in the meaningful experience. I think that's a great question. Ultimately, though, I would hedge on staying away from adding experiences into your personal statement unless they're absolutely necessary to be able to tell your overarching story about why you would like to become a physician.
All right, great. Here's another question out there, which maybe I'll throw to you, Dr. Katzen. The question asks, can we include significant high school achievements and activities in our application? What do you usually tell applicants when they ask that question?
Ideally, you like to see the progress and growth and the participation that somebody has had through their college years. I think that shows to me a little bit more that, as Dr. Lipset was mentioning, they're able to handle the workload, yes, yet participate in other activities. On the other hand, if it was a significant experience, that I think shows shape to the character, whether it was volunteering and showing altruism. Occasionally I will. My preference is I avoid them unless we just don't seem to have enough strength in the college activities to insert into the application. To me, it's all about, again, as Dr. Lipset mentioned, I mean, I think it's one of the potential places where you sell yourself, you end on a positive, and this is part of accentuating the applicant or enhancing the application in all places. One, obviously, is the personal statement, and the other is to make yourself interesting and show that you've done some things of significance. And I guess in summary, my preference is not to go back to high school if not necessary. But if the applicant seems to be weak, it may be a way of enhancing an otherwise somewhat weakened application.
All right, great. Dr. Lipset, we have a question for reapplicants. I think we got this question a lot, so it would be helpful to give everybody your take, which is, should a reapplicant, number one, rewrite their personal statement, and how different should it be? And then number two, on secondary applications, which we really didn't even hit on today, but obviously an important part of the application, how different should secondary applications be for a reapplicant? What is your take on it?
No, that is a great question. It's commonly asked. I mean, my personal preference is to refresh what had been submitted initially, that even though um, a majority of the application may be similar second time around, there are a number of reasons why you might want to update and refresh the application. First of all, it shows that you've expended some additional effort. Number two, one would hope that second time around you have a more competitive application. That during that gap time you have additional meaningful experiences. That even though you may have been disappointed in not getting into medical school, you're not defensive about it, but rather you took very positive steps to learn as much as you could to make your application more competitive the next time around, and you should incorporate that somehow into the application. So bottom line, much of the application can remain the same, but I really think it should be updated, upgraded, and freshened.
All right, great. And I would have to agree with that advice wholeheartedly. Dr. Marinelli, here's a great question from Kushant out there, which is, any tips on how to write so many secondaries in a small window? And I think this is a question we get all the time, and it's a very relevant question when students are applying to a lot of different schools at once and all of a sudden have a lot of different secondaries to fill out. So any tips for those students who are all of a sudden have to write a lot of secondaries, Dr. Marinelli?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I guess I will echo myself again, is start early. So you definitely don't have to wait to receive your secondary application to start writing it. So most secondary prompts are available on the internet, and we, as MedSchoolCoach, we have them available as well. So for schools that you know you're going to apply to and likely will receive a secondary, and just for your information, most schools don't screen too heavily on secondary applications. So if you submit your primary application, you will likely receive a secondary application for most schools. So if you want, right after you submit your AMCAS, or even beforehand, if you finish your MCAS, start working on those secondary applications. If you know that you're applying to USC, pull up that USC application and secondary application prompt and start completing it. And in that way, when you do actually receive that invitation to submit that secondary in July or August, then you can just proofread it and then turn it around within a couple of days, which is going to show those medical schools that you are very interested in their school and very motivated to apply. If you don't have that dedication to start that early, then what I suggest is try to free up those couple of months in the summer when you are expecting a lot of secondary applications, because you will get quite busy with those. Make sure you're having regular access to your email. So when you do receive those, you can try to turn them over as fast as possible. We recommend at least, a week is ideal. 2 weeks is where you definitely want to stay in. Any further than that, again, you're going to show a lack of interest in the school. So 1 to 2 weeks is where you really, really want to stay for a turnaround time, and just dedicate yourself to completing those essays and making sure, though, that you are writing good secondaries, even though you're trying to do it as quickly as possible.
All right, great. Dr. Eilers, a question for you. How do you convey wanting to be a physician without sounding like bragging or simply going into listing a resume-like answer?
Okay. I think that a lot of it's going to be your story, that your reasons for medicine, your interest in being empathetic to others, having a natural curiosity to learn more about the human body, or pursuing research. You'll be able to talk about how you've been able to have certain exposures that really help guide this. I don't think it necessarily has to be a list, but I think at the same time, if you're putting in your last paragraph about why you're going to be a great physician, that it is a little bit of a selling point. I don't think it necessarily has to be bragging. You don't have to say, for instance, talk about your GPA or MCAT, as those are big no-nos, but you can definitely talk about how you're passionate, you're enthusiastic about the research you're working on, that you're interested in translating the research into coming up with ways to help patients. For instance, some people who I've worked with have a lot of experience with translational research, that they're very interested in the science and how can they take this and invent something to help a patient. But that without the medical degree, they won't understand the disease states or how to best help a patient. But yet they also have an interest in research and that they want to be able to help on multiple levels. And I think you can tie that in together about how you've had the research experience, which will be supported with more detail in the application about how this is going to shape your interest in becoming a physician. I don't think you ever, as we said, you shouldn't list necessarily or make bullet points, but you can definitely talk about things that are important qualities and characteristics that you possess and discuss, such as altruism, empathy, curiosity, and just dedication to what you're passionate about.
All right, thank you. Dr. Katzen, here's kind of a somewhat basic question, but I think an interesting one because I think different people may have different takes on this and would love to hear your take on it, which is sort of revolves around grammar and the personal statement. One person has asked, should I avoid using contractions in my personal statement? What is your general take on sort of the formality of the writing style in a personal statement, Dr. Katzen?
I think some of that was actually addressed by Dr. Lipset. I think that, and Dr. Marinelli actually, I think you need to use proper English. I think that there's some simple tools out there. You know, most of the applicants are using Word or even something like Grammarly. Will correct a lot of those errors. In general, I think the less contractions, the more clear-cut wording and verbiage serves the applicant a little bit better and makes the essay read a little bit cleaner. I'm surprised at times to see, you know, as was mentioned, sentences beginning with small letters or beginning with prepositions or because or whatnot. And I think as Dr. Lipset alluded to, I think a lot of that can be avoided if it's essentially read out loud, even to yourself. And I think that most of the contractions would probably be eliminated. I'm not a big fan of them.
All right, thank you. Dr. Lipset, a question for you, and this goes a little bit into something we didn't discuss a lot about, which is a school list. There's a question out here that says, how do I choose which schools to apply to? And obviously, I think this is a question that's very personalized depending on a student's GPA and MCAT, but what's your general sort of sense, or how do you generally tell applicants how many schools and how to really weed out the schools that maybe aren't for them?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to be practical. Most students have, a limited resources, and so you want to have an intelligent list of schools. Numbers do count to some extent. The application, rather the admissions process, is somewhat subjective, and some would argue on occasion even a little imperfect, and so there is a statistical benefit to applying to a fairly large number of schools for most applicants, usually 25 or 30, because the bottom line is you just don't know. You never know exactly what qualities a committee might be looking for in any given year. So there is some statistical advantage to applying to a large number of schools, but you want it to be a smart list. And, there are algorithms, that we use, and there are models that we use to try to focus on target schools. Now, of course, applying to some reach schools is perfectly legitimate. Like I say, there's a little element of surprise here, you never know. And also some schools that may be considered a little less competitive, even though there are no safety schools anymore. I hate that term. But the fact is that an intelligent, targeted list of usually about 25 or 30 schools is a good idea. Also, you take into account the state of residence, because for many of these institutions, both public and private, but especially the public, often there's state funding, and there will be some quota. Some part of the mission statement could be to benefit residents of a given state. So you take this all into account. Well, and also you want the individual to be happy and to be comfortable. So if they have a geographic preference, that's also factored in. So the bottom line is an individualized list of schools for each applicant simply makes the most sense.
All right, great. One more question for Dr. Marinelli here, which is centered around, is it too bold to mention specific areas of medicine you're interested in, such as a specific specialty, let's say dermatology or neurology, within your personal statement, or do you feel like students should stay a little bit more general?
I think that it's okay to mention specific areas that maybe you've spent a lot of time in and that you have an interest in. And I often get asked this question during interviews. However, I think it's important to not be completely focused on that area or just sound like this is the only area of medicine that you're interested in pursuing and that the rest of it is not of interest to you. So I think it's definitely okay. I've had a lot of people that maybe are really interested in orthopedics or plastic surgery. So that's where they've spent most of their volunteer time or shadowing so that they can talk about that during their in their application, especially in their personal statement. But I still think they should be open to other areas of medicine and make sure that they're just not portraying themselves as a closed book on that specific um, area.
All right, great. So I completely agree with everything Dr. Marinelli said there as well. So guys, it's now approximately 10:10, so it's a little bit late here on the East Coast time, and we like to keep these webinars to about an hour long. And I know a lot of you have amazing questions and excellent questions that we wish we could get to all the answers, but unfortunately we can't always do that. However, what we definitely like to do is be able to, number one, share this webinar with you after, and you should get a link to it in a couple of days. Number two, help you along in any way you feel like you need. We've been doing this now at MedSchoolCoach for about 10 years and have had tremendous success with our applicants getting into school. A lot of that has to do with simply our advisors sort of really being experts in the field. As you heard from Dr. Barinelli, Lipset, Eilers, and Katzen today, they really know what they're talking about and what an admissions committee looks for. Every applicant is unique, and every applicant is able to make their application something that is going to stand out. It just sometimes takes a little bit of work. And so we're hoping to be able to help you through those aspects along with anything else you guys need in your journey to medical school. We're always here for you, so always feel free to shoot us an email with any questions. But hopefully you can take a look at some of our services, understanding that not everybody's going to sign up for our services, and so there's a lot of other great resources out there. If you check out our blog, there's a lot of free tips right on there. Our Facebook page, along with our Twitter account, has a lot of free tips all the time. And so I encourage you to check those out as you're going through the process and applying. I really hope this was helpful for everybody and gave them a little bit of a framework for their application. I'd really like to thank our advisors for taking some time out of their day and sitting down and sharing their experience. I think one of the things that our advisors really love to do is things like this and just talking with students. That's why we all do this, because we really like to connect with students, connect with pre-meds, and help them through the process and develop great mentorship relationships. So hopefully you guys can develop some relationships of your own with our advisors or with anybody else out there who you feel like has taken this path before you and can help you along. So thank you again, everybody, for attending. Again, I apologize that we can't get to everybody's questions. However, check out our blog, check out our Facebook page, shoot us an email with any questions. And again, a recording of this will be available to you after. So thanks again. I hope you guys found this beneficial, and a special thank you to everybody from our staff who was able to join. We really appreciate it, and I know all the students do as well. So good luck, everybody, in your application. Obviously, it's a long road from here until next March, when hopefully you have a bunch of acceptances, but you can certainly do it, and I hope to be helping a lot of you guys personally through the application process as well. So thanks again, and everybody have a great night.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.